So today we'll have a look at a few advanced patching techniques with the new Cnoc module from Instruo, which is now also available for free in VCV rack. All of the ideas and techniques in this video and many more with different modules and in different directions are available in my patching techniques and ideas PDF. Of course, I will put a link in the description if you are interested. And we will look at a few ideas in VCV rack, but also a few in hardware. And the first one I want to start with is using Cnoc as a trigger delay module with CV control. So here I have a trigger, you can see it on the scope. I can trigger it manually, right? And if I send a copy of it to the input, to the trigger input of Cnoc, and then I will use the end of cycle output, which will output a trigger whenever Cnoc ends its cycle. I can delay this trigger by using the attack and release times. They will be basically the delay times, right? So now the trigger happens at the same time as the original one. But if I bring up the attack time, you see we get two triggers, right? So basically we get the original trigger and then the delayed version of it. Right, and again we have CV inputs for both the attack and release, so this can also be controlled with voltage. Right, so here I have a small example. I have here two voices being sequenced by the same sequencer, the ADDR sequencer, quantized by the Instruo Harmonic. One voice is the IO47 filter as a voice. Basically I'm using the trigger to ping it, and another voice is Neoni. It will sound like this. Right now, one copy of the trigger from Harmonic is directly going to the IO47 for pinging, but another one goes first through Cnoc, which means that now I can delay this trigger and the second voice will cover it a bit later. Right? And again, this has also CV inputs, so I can also control this with control voltage. So if I trigger another sequencer that I have here another ADDR sequencer, I can use it to modulate, for example, the attack times, and like this create more movement in the sequence. Right, you can hear this interesting wonky rhythm we get just by delaying the trigger for the second voice. Of course, this can also work nicely with drums. Right, so here I have a kick drum. And I have also a hi-hat. For now it's playing at the same time. Right, but again, the trigger for the hi-hat goes first through Cnoc, so again I can delay it. Right, and I can create a different rhythm, like an offbeat rhythm. But again, we have a CV input for this, so I can control this with external voltage. Once again, I will use another ADDR sequencer. Get this interesting wonky rhythm. All I have to do is add a nice bass to this with crewing and the IO47. Another idea is using Cnoc to take a trigger and convert it into a gate, and again we have CV control over the gate length. So here I have again a manual trigger. I can trigger, and you can see this on the scope. Now I want to turn this trigger into a gate, so I'm going to send again a copy of it to the input of Cnoc, and now I'm going to use the gate output, right? It will output a gate as long as the attack or the release stage are active, and this you can do with the switch here, switch between attack and release. Right, so if I use this gate and have a look at it on the scope, right, for now we still get triggers, but if I take now the release time a bit up, you can see we start getting gates that will be open or will be high for longer, and again according in this case to the attack time. And also here we have CV inputs, so we have basically a voltage controlled trigger to gate converter. So here again I have a small example. I have here a different sequencer. In this case it's Entropia from the geodesics, again going through Harmoneg, in this case sequencing Neoni, right? It will sound like this. I'm sending Neoni through the Vinca VCA and I'm using SACE or SAIS to open this VCA, right? And I want to have also the sustain stage. In this case, instead of just triggers, I want to use gates. So I'm going to send the triggers to Cnoc and again use the gate output, in this case to gate the envelope. And now with the attack time I can choose the gate length. The longer the gate, the longer the nodes will sustain. Right, and again also this we have CV control, right? So if I use for example the second output of Harmoneg to modulate or to control the attack time, higher nodes will have longer sustain. Right, and we get variation. I can add some delay to this with the corner block too. So let's have a look at this one in hardware. I have here two Cnoc modules. I'm going to use one of them as a voltage controlled clock source, so I can get all sorts of interesting wonky rhythms out of this. Basically we have to set it to loop, right? As you can see here on the scope we have a looping, in this case it's a triangle wave. And now once again from the end of cycle output we will get a trigger whenever each cycle ends, right? And this we can use as a trigger source, as a clock source. So this I'm going to use to trigger my voltage block here, right? And you can see that it's moving. Let's also listen to this. I have here one sequence set to sequence Neoni going through Ghost. Right, so again, the Cnoc module is looping and the end of cycle is triggering or clocking the voltage block. And now it's enough that I change either the attack or the release, or both of course, and we get a different rate, a different BPM if you will. Right, shorter attack times in this case will create a quicker clock source, or slower. Right, and again we have CV inputs, so I can basically also modulate the clock rate. And I'm going to do this with another sequence here from the voltage block. So this will go, in this case I will use just the attack. Right, and now I can create all sorts of interesting rhythms. So let's do something like this. I'm just changing the values. Right, let's do it maybe even shorter. Right, so we can get interesting sequences. Of course, you can do this also randomly. With a random sequence if you want. This is also the base for a Krell patch, but in this case it's really interesting to create wonky rhythms. Another thing I can do in this case, another sort of a bonus tip, I have here, I'm using the bipolar output from Cnoc, which means that if I use this to modulate the fold amount of Neoni, it will bring it also in and out in amplitude also, because negative voltages will basically close the sort of built-in VCA here on Neoni. Right? I'm going to add a bass to this from Queen. Right, I have here another sequence. The next idea is to use Cnoc to add ratcheting, and again also here with CV control. So here I have a gate or a trigger coming from the TSL triggering Cnoc, and I'm using the end of cycle trigger output. Right, again you can see this here on the scope. Now if I turn Cnoc to looping mode, as soon as you set it to looping mode, Cnoc will start looping, but I'm still triggering it. I'm still using the TSL to trigger it. So we still get the same rhythm. But now when I start shortening the release time, have a look what happens on the scope. We get more and more triggers. Right, so when the release time is long enough, we get basically the original triggers. But when I start taking it down, we get more and more triggers that will basically create this ratcheting effect. Once again, I have here a small example. I have here the Sec3 in this case, sequencing Neoni. Right, it will sound like this. Right, and I'm using Cnoc basically to open the VCA, open Vinca. Right, so I'm using the envelope output. Right, and it's set also to looping. And have a listen to what happens when I start shortening the release time. Right, the envelope becomes shorter and shorter, and we get ratcheting basically. Now you can do this with the envelope output, you can do this with the end of cycle output as well, as I have shown you before. And again, also this, we have CV control over the release time. So I have here another sequence programmed on the Sec3. Right? And like this, I can add ratcheting. So now we'll have a look at using Cnoc as a slew limiter, but again with voltage control, so we can add slew on specific steps if you want it when it goes up, when it goes down. This can work with pitch, this can work with modulation as well, smoothing out a modulation source. So what I have here, I have Neoni set as an LFO as the main clock. It's driving the voltage block, which is sequencing, and you can see this sequence, it's a 7-step sequence. Sequencing the TSL, going through, again, ghost. Right, and now instead of sending this sequence directly to the TSL, I can send it first through Cnoc. Yes, sending the pitch information first to the input of Cnoc, and then from there, from the positive output, or the unipolar output, send it back, and you can see this also on the scope, back to the TSL. Now you have to make sure that it's in the attack sustain release mode. Right, and now basically we have the same sequence. You can see this again here on the scope. And now with the attack, by lengthening the attack time, I can bring in slew when the pitch goes up. You can see this again on the scope, I hope. Right, and with the release, of course, when it goes down. And again, we have CV inputs for the attack and the release. So I have here two more sequences coming from the voltage block. One has 12 steps, another one has 16 steps. And this is really where the whole fun begins, when you have different lengths for the different modulation sequences. And then you get all sorts of different interesting results. So one I'm going to use to control the attack time, another one I'm going to use to control the release time. Right, and now we will have slew only on specific steps. Right, and again it will change because the original sequence, the pitch sequence has 7 steps, one modulation sequence has 12 steps, another modulation sequence has 16 steps, so they will always meet each other at different points. The next idea is using Cnoc as an envelope follower, basically following the amplitude, the volume of the incoming audio and outputting CV accordingly. And you can use this in all sorts of different ways. So here I have a drum loop. Right now I'm going to send this to the input of Cnoc, to the main input, to the trigger input, and set Cnoc to attack, sustain, release mode. Right, and you can see this, you can see the signal here on the scope. Right, and according to the attack and release times, in this case I'm going to change the release times, we can shape the envelope, the outcoming envelope, and we get the amplitude envelope of the drums basically. Right, and now we can use this in all sorts of different ways. Here I have noise going through the IO47, right, it will sound like this. And I can use this voltage to open the cutoff of the filter and add another layer to the drums. So this is one thing you can do. Let's wait for it to stop. I have another example here with the guitar. Right, so it will sound like this. Right, you can see I already have the amplitude envelope here on the scope. Again, sending it to the input of Cnoc, setting it to attack, sustain, release mode. And then in this case with the release, I just changed it so I get the envelope that I want. Right, so now I'm going to use this envelope to again open up a filter. In this case I'm using the Cnoc oscillator, but I'm using the end of cycle output of this sample to trigger sample and hold and to generate pitch information. So we get something that plays together with this guitar, and this is quite cool. Right, we get another layer. If I take out the guitar, let's see if I can make this. This is now just the Cnoc oscillator moving together, or the filter is moving together with the amplitude, with the actual volume of this guitar. And the end of cycle will change notes now and then. Let's have a look now at using Cnoc as a slope detector, basically detecting the direction of incoming CV and outputting a gate that will stay open as long as the incoming CV goes up or as long as it goes down. We have the switch here that can switch between attack and release for the gate output. I'm going to leave it at attack. In this case, I'm going to use pitch information, which means that Cnoc will output a gate that will stay high as long as the pitch goes up. So let me show you what I mean by that. Here we have the pitch sequence here on the scope. I'm using the TSL as my clock source. And again, Neoni as my audio source, as my voice. It goes once directly to the mixer. Right, you can hear the pitch goes up, the pitch goes down. Right, and now let's say that I want only when the pitch goes up, when it's in the direction of going up, that Neoni will also go through ghost for delay, reverb, some distortion, right? Just adding another layer only when the pitch goes up. So I'm going to use a copy, right, of this sequence, and I'm going to send it to the input of Cnoc. And again, I have to set it to attack, sustain, release mode, right? And now I'm going to use the gate output. Let me show you this also on the scope. Right, and again, the gate output is set to attack, which means that when the pitch goes up, it will output a gate that will stay high. And with the attack control, I can set the length of this gate. Have a look on the scope. Right, the pitch goes up, the sequence goes up, and I have a gate, right, that opens and basically will stay open according to the attack and according to how long the sequence goes up, right? In this case, it's in pitch because I'm using this for pitch information, right? So again, the pitch goes to the input, or the sequence goes to the input of Cnoc, and Cnoc will output a gate as long as it detects that the incoming pitch goes up. Now, this gate I'm going to use to gate another Cnoc that I have here. You can use it, of course, to gate any other envelope if you want, and you can do this also not only with pitch, you can do this with random voltages, with all sorts of different sequences if you want, or modulation sources. Right, so this gate is going to gate another Cnoc, and this Cnoc is going to open the built-in VCA on ghost, right? So now again, only when the pitch goes up, we get a gate that will basically open the VCA on ghost, right, and will bring in right, if I take the feedback down, right, so it will bring in ghost only when the pitch goes up. So together with the original sequence, we get those two layers. This one is also a fun one, basically using Cnoc as a distortion module, sending audio into Cnoc and turning this audio into a binary signal, into a digital signal, either on or off, distorting the signal, and this you can use to add another layer to your sound. I like doing this with percussion or drums, but of course you can experiment with all different sources, all sorts of different sources. So here I have a few drums set. I have here a sort of a kick/tom, I guess, and clicks coming from the Vogue filter. Basically, I'm sending one Cnoc into the Vogue filter, sort of pinging it, if you will. I have here another sort of noise. This is Neoni. Going to this one new, I hope you can see this flip module from After Later Audio. This is the branches clone from Mutable Instruments. Basically turning Neoni into noise, again going through a filter. And I have here also some chords with psych, also going through a filter, so everything together. Right, it will sound like this. You can see this also on the scope. Right, and now I'm going to send a copy of the drums. I'm going to send a copy of them into the input of Cnoc, right? And then from the gate output, I will get the digital version, the binary version, the distorted version of these gates, right? And we will have a look at this also on the scope. Right, and you can see this, I hope you can see this, this is the blue trace, you can see it's just gates going up and down. Right, now if I take this for a second out of the mix, out of the output, I'm going to send this now to Ghost, right, just for some processing, maybe effects, some filtering, and this is basically how it will sound like. So this is now the distorted version. Right? And with the attack and the release times, I can change the color of the distortion, I guess, or the type of distortion. And of course, this is also with voltage control, right? Adding some effects here. Right, so again, this is now just the original drums. And now adding the distorted version. Listen to how much it adds to the sound. And that was it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you will go and explore Cnoc in all sorts of different ways. Again, it's available for free in VCV Rack. I wish you lots and lots of fun. Cheers.